meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board to order. Let's start with a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Velasquez, roll call.
Anthony Brown.
Present.
John Gustafson.
Present.
James Gallen.
Present.
Julius Wiggum. Mario Shepard.
Here.
Edward Canudi.
Here.
Corey Blackwell Sr.
Present.
Frederick McCoy.
Here.
Renee James. Corey is present.
Mr. Velasquez, do we have any substitution of voting rights for this evening meeting?
Yes, Jeff Gagnon, Assistant Director of Community Development. We did hear from Ms. James that she would not be able to make tonight's meeting due to a family emergency. I did not hear from Mr. Wiggum, so he may be en route currently. However, due to both of those primary board members being absent, I would ask that both the first alternate and second alternate receive voting rights.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon. That takes us right to number 3, acknowledgement of those members that are absent in the notification. Is there a motion? Is there a motion for acknowledgement of the board member absence?
I'm so moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Canudi, and it was a second by Mr. Blackwell. Roll call on the acknowledgement of board member absence.
Yeah, they just did it.
Anthony Brown.
Yes.
John Gustafson.
Yes.
James Gallen.
Yes.
Mario Shepard.
Yes.
Edward Canudi.
Yes.
Corey Blackwell Sr.
Yes.
Frederick McCoy.
Yes.
And was voting, motion approved.
Thank you. Item number 4, additions and deletions to the agenda.
Yes, I wanted to notify the board that City Manager Evans did state that he would be unable to make it to tonight's meeting due to a previous engagement as well. However, as he stated previously, he does intend on coming to Planning and Zoning Board meetings in the future. I also want to make note of documents that were provided to the board. First, we have a revised public comment card. So this was not provided to the board, however, they are available in the back of the room. So it's new and improved. It allows for comments to be read into the record or for individuals to speak on items, whichever they choose to do, and allows for additional public participation in the meetings. Additionally, please note that there's a membership list that was provided. It's in a draft form. So if you could all look at the contact information and update it accordingly. If you provide me any updates at the end of the meeting, I can revise that and provide a finalized form to the board. There's also a memo provided dated April 20th, which discussed the acknowledgement of board member absence notification that we just ran through. There's also a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, a hard copy that we will get into momentarily in regards to board member orientation. There are no other changes and no other notifications.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon. Disclosure by members of the board. Any members wishing to disclose? Adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Canuti, and there was a second by Mrs. Shepherd. Roll
Anthony
call.
Brown,
Yes.
John Gustafson,
Yes.
James Callen,
Yes.
Margaret Shepherd,
Yes.
Edward Kennedy,
Yes.
Corey Blackwell Sr.,
Yes.
Frederick McCoy.
Yes.
Unanimous voting, motion approved.
Thank you. Item number 6, approval of the minutes of April 13, 2017. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Properly moved, and there's a second by Mrs. Shepherd. Roll call.
Anthony Brown,
Yes.
John Gustafson,
Yes.
James Callen,
Yes.
Margaret Shepherd,
Yes.
Edward Kennedy,
Yes.
Corey Blackwell Sr.,
Yes.
Frederick McCoy.
Yes.
Unanimous voting, motion approved.
Thank you. Item number 7, board member orientation. Mr. Gagnon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So due to the fact that we have 4 new board members, it seemed prudent to go through a orientation and a refresher for those board members that have been with us for some time. Within this discussion, I'll touch upon both the duties of the Planning and Zoning Board, parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules of Order, in the Sunshine Law, and public records. If at any point the board member has questions, please just stop me and I'll be happy to answer them. So the Planning and Zoning Board was created and defined in Chapter 27 of the City's Code of Ordinances. This was originally approved in 1957. So there are some elements that may not be as relevant now as they were then. However, this code section does govern the board and the responsibilities and duties. Overall, the Planning and Zoning Board is responsible for reviewing documents and amendments to those documents. Those include the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, as well as land development regulations, our zoning map, and other zoning designations. Another major component of the board is to review land development applications, which could be for site plan approval, could be for plats, could be for landscape plans associated with site plans. So those are the main aspects of the board's duties. Overall, the board is an advisory board to the City Council, meaning that you're really tasked with making a recommendation to City Council. However, the City Council does have the authority to either approve, modify, or overrule any recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Board. Today, I did send out an email that provided web links to some of the most often used resources by the Planning and Zoning Board. That included a link to the city's comprehensive plan. It was a link also to the future land use map and zoning map, as well as the City Code of Ordinances, which is maintained by a third-party provider known as municode.com. It's a pretty customary procedure and method of maintaining code of ordinances. If you go to their website, which is municode.com, you can see that there are multiple municipalities that use the same provider for maintenance of code of ordinances. Within the code, Chapter 31 is most frequently used by the board. That's our zoning section of the code. And the district regulation sections, which outline specific provisions for land development, are held within Article 5. The city's website is also a pretty valuable resource, and we also upload the recordings of the meetings to YouTube as well. So if you choose to go back and reference any point of the meeting, we've been doing that for some time, so we have meetings archived for the past few years that way. Do we have any specific questions at this point? Seeing none, moving on to Robert's Rules of Order and just parliamentary procedure. So our board quorum is 4 members. We have 7 full-time members and 2 alternates. As we've seen tonight, if the primary members are absent, then the alternate members would have voting rights as well. We've already seen that firsthand, so we don't really need to discuss that much more. So basics for parliamentary procedure. It's really intended to have an organized structure for discussion and really to allow for all parties to participate fully in the conversation, whether they're for or against an item. When making a motion on an item, a majority of the board members would constitute approval of that motion. And when making a motion, typically it's preferred to have an affirmative motion. So the motion would be that I move that we versus I move that we do not. So that helps avoid some confusion if it's affirmative. However, if there is ever a time where there's a motion made and there's any sort of confusion on what the actual intent is of the motion by the motion maker, or if there's any confusion to what the final result of the motion would cause, it's definitely appropriate and customary for a board member to ask questions. So we'd much rather have you ask a question and say, I don't fully understand this aspect of this particular motion. Can I have further clarity? Instead of voting and feeling as if you voted incorrectly, or you may have voted in a manner that wasn't true to what you wanted to vote. One item that hasn't come up in some time is the ability for a board member to abstain from voting. So really the only time that a board member can just completely abstain from voting is if there's a conflict. So if there's an item that may be somewhat of a hot button item, and maybe you just don't want to vote on it, unfortunately that's not reason enough to recuse yourself from voting. So in that situation, you would still have to vote if you're an active board member. Any questions?
Jeff, may I ask a question?
Yes, Ms. Shepard.
So if you definitely take a stand that you're not going to vote on that item, is there some type of reprimand, or do you try to come to some type of agreement? Just how does that work?
That's a really good question. I guess I'd have to research it further. But I think that really the item wouldn't be able to progress and the motion wouldn't be able to progress unless that board member took action, whether it was a yes or no vote.
Well, will you have an opportunity to table that item until you get clarity on that item?
If there's an active motion on the floor, I don't believe that that would be an option unless the original motion maker amended their motion. So really, once the motion has been made and voting has started, and if there's no direct conflicts, then that board member would have to proceed with a yes or no vote on the motion.
Ms. Shepard, if I may, as the authorized representatives of the city are compelled to, as the representative, voice whatever your conscience is. The only time the law prevents you not to vote, if there's a conflict of interest, which is concisely defined, is you're going to make money in the deal, somebody close to you is going to make money in the deal, or there's some other special benefit that's going to procure, especially to you or somebody in your immediate family, as a result of the decision, then you can not vote. That's the only time you can't vote.
Okay.
You don't like the issue, vote against it.
No, I not that I ever encountered it. I'm just
Yes, ma'am.
saying.
That is the only time you cannot vote, is when there's obviously something available which is going to inure to your private benefit of somebody close to you in your immediate family in some form or fashion, whether it be financial or otherwise. And if that does occur, there's certain disclosure requirements you're to make within a prescribed period. I think it's 15 days, but I'm not sure as I sit here.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Gagnon,
Yes, sir.
to that same point, would you be able to speak to the disclosure requirement that we actually just went through today when it comes to disclosure by board members prior to voting on the item? if you're prepared.
Right, so to restate the question, if you knew of a conflict prior to the item being discussed, is that what you're referencing? Or
Well,
maybe during conversation, you may realize that there's a potential conflict?
well, no, not necessarily, but I know routinely, and I know at least for the last few years, we've kind of made note on the record that we've met with, potential
Yes.
applicants, or, we've took a tour of the property just to put on the record that we've had some contact with the applicant, or I don't know if that provision still applies for like what we have today, like the land use ordinances, but is there, I guess, a mechanism in which we would need to disclose, even when we've had discussions with the city attorney, the city manager, or some other staff member regarding something that comes before the board?
Yes, I understand your question now. There is actually a section a little bit later on in the presentation that discusses disclosures in a little bit more detail. As you did mention, there is a disclosure section. On tonight's agenda, it's Roman numeral number 5. So that really provides any board member the opportunity just to state that they either met with a potential developer or they met with their agent, to really just air out any sort of meeting that could have potentially happened, and that would be the appropriate time to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon.
So Florida's government in the Sunshine Law, which is most commonly referred to just as Sunshine Law. The intent of this law is to really provide access to public meetings, so that any sort of either advisory board, whether it's full of elected officials or people that are appointed to the board, no matter what type of meeting, that if it's a public meeting, it's open to the public, allows for public participation, and that it's accessible to anyone that wants to access it. So the specific statute section 286.011 provides that the meeting must be open and available to the public, so that would apply to the Planning and Zoning Board. That reasonable notice is given, and that meeting minutes are also taken, which by default would become part of the city's public records. So if any interested party wanted to request meeting minutes, they'd be able to do so. Now, there are specific limitations on discussion of items by board members outside of a public meeting. So if you have an individual meeting, just one-on-one with staff, that's perfectly fine. I would recommend, if you have any specific questions about items, that you contact staff directly. But what can happen is that 2 board members or 3 board members, any number of board members outside of the active meeting, discuss an item that they may have to act on as a board. So that would be in direct violation of the Sunshine Laws, and there are penalties that would potentially come down if that were to occur. One interesting, I guess it's a case that occurred, is this can be as specific as a recess period during an active meeting. So if for some reason we had a 5-minute recess at our meeting today, and 2 board members start having a conversation about the ordinance that we have a little bit later on in the agenda, technically that could be seen as a violation, being that it's not an active meeting. So even being mindful of when you're first coming into the council chambers, small talk about the weather, or the game last night is perfectly fine, but just don't start having a conversation a little bit too early about agenda items. So just be very mindful of that, and that the Sunshine Laws do exist. Just a few suggestions. Again, please contact staff if you have questions about anything to do with the agenda. I know that prior to this meeting, I did have a few board members reach out to me, and I think I got back to them within half an hour maybe. So we're accessible. We want to provide answers. That's really what we're here for. The sooner you ask the questions, the sooner we can prepare responses for you. So we definitely appreciate the board being active. But again, don't be active amongst one another outside the meeting. Just direct it to staff. One thing to be
Mr.
careful of.
I have a question.
Yes.
What is considered staff?
I'm using staff very open as just a city employee.
Thank you.
The representatives of the appointing authority.
One thing that I haven't seen happen firsthand, but I've heard stories of replying all to an email when maybe it's an accidental reply all and you may not even see that there's 50 people copied on this email. If you accidentally reply all, you could inadvertently copy another board member if there's any sort of conversation about an item that's to be discussed. It's just something, again, to be aware of because that could run into sunshine issues as well. So be very careful with reply alls and emails if it has anything to do with pending items or items that you think may come before the board. And again, there are many resources available. I've provided one web link to the Attorney General's website, which is a good place to start. However, there's a lot of resources online. And if you have any specific questions following the meeting, then please reach out to me. So any time you reach out to me, be very mindful that email correspondence is public record. So if it's something that's you feel is personally confidential, if there's a reason that you have to miss a meeting and you don't want it to be an email record, then just give me a phone call. Again, it could be email, text, written correspondence, anything like that will be part of the public record, so just be mindful of that. More so, the membership list itself is public record. Your applications for the board would be considered public record, so anything that you want to have or remove from that membership list, just let me know, and we can have the final list published and make sure that we have the information we need to on there.
Excuse me, Mr. Director, if I may, as part of that item right there, my home address maybe should be redacted from, I guess, this list as well as any of the prior lists that we have published so far because of my capacity as a deputy sheriff.
Understood. We can look back at what we have for records and we'll do so to the fullest extent possible.
Thank you.
And also I'll make note so we can update the membership list. So to the chairperson's point earlier, as far as the timing of the meeting for disclosure, there is a specific agenda section at the beginning of the meeting to allow for disclosures from the board. At that point, if you have had a meeting with any agent or any applicant, that's the time to disclose that. In conjunction with that membership list, there is contact information that's public record. So if an agent wants to reach out to you, they have the ability to do so, but it's really up to the individual board member how they want to react to that. There's nothing that compels you as a board member to entertain that. If you have specific questions that you would like to ask them, you can do so. However, you can also say, no, thank you, I'll contact staff if I have specific questions. So that's really a personal preference, and it might depend on the item being presented, but just be mindful of that as well. So overall, does the board have any questions on what was presented tonight?
Mr. Gagnon,
Yes, sir.
my question about the disclosure, does that only apply to agents and applicants? Or is there a requirement that we disclose? Like I think I called you about a question I had related to the filling stations. Is there a requirement that I disclose that in a public meeting that I met with staff regarding that?
I'm not sure if
There's no legal requirement that you do it. You can.
Okay. Well, I think it's probably good to know just going forward.
Yes.
I'm sorry, sir. Yeah, so there may not be a legal requirement, but personally, I think that just any sort of disclosure that you feel is appropriate as a board member, then just do so. And that way it'll be part of the record and you'll feel more comfortable and there won't be any questions in the future.
Okay.
Mr. Gagnon,
Yes, ma'am.
if a board member, I just recently saw this happen, call you and they don't agree with your synopsis of the question, how do you handle that? I mean, it was a long, drawn-out question. I think legal answered it, but the person still was not happy with the legal question. How do we do that? Do we continue the dialogue of what they want, or do they have to accept what legal, or I guess the director have to say? Because I don't think we should ever go through that again. Do we have some type of structure in place?
I think as city staff, we really try to base our opinions off of law whenever possible. So if there's specific code sections that are being questioned, oftentimes staff will provide specific code sections to whoever's asking the question, and normally that kind of provides a final answer. Not to say that it will fully satisfy whoever's asking the question, but at least there'll be a response provided and it'll be based on some legal structure.
And if they don't accept your answer, then what do? You continue to try to work through it to get an answer, or you just pull back and let it go?
Sometimes, if there's still not full satisfaction, I found that maybe it's asking the question in a different way. So sometimes it's just staff's not fully understanding what's being asked in the question. Oftentimes we're used to seeing things in a more rigid manner versus someone that's not working with site plans or landscape plans all day. So sometimes by revisiting the question and kind of going through really where the starting point is and where the question asker is trying to go, we're often able to provide a more elaborate and detailed response. Doesn't mean it's going to fully satisfy the question, but it helps at least provide further direction.
So does legal has the last say-so in that particular matter, or do you take it a step further to satisfy that person? Does legal have the last say-so in a matter that's being, I guess, going back and forth? Because I think that particular answer, I don't think that person ever received the answer. Mr. Legal?
You lost me.
Okay.
I can say this. I do not control the decision making. That is really clear. That's why you've been appointed, to make the decisions. If there is an issue presented to you and there's a lack of information or lack of understanding, then staff will do whatever it can to try to resolve that lack of information. We may or we may not. The ultimate decision, with or without that information, would be yours, but you would have to vote.
But I think I'm asking a question. Do legal,
Okay, you're asking me.
you,
Okay, yes, ma'am.
after you give the report back to the director, are you the one that have the last say-so over the legal issue, or does it go back to the director? How do you figure it out? It was a cloud there that no one seemed to have an answer to, and it just went on and on and on. And how do you figure it out?
We got two questions that affect your decision making. The fact questions belong to him. The legal questions belong to me. But they are both fit within the scope of advice. One of the challenges I've had for 35 years being a lawyer is you can give clients the best advice in the world. Final decision is always theirs.
It's always
The clients.
the client.
And for the purposes of this meeting, you are my client. So I will give you what the law says, but how you utilize that tool in terms of your decision making is something to your discretion. You know, and sometimes it's not done correctly. You know, and those issues are addressed in the judicial forum. But trust me, I'll do everything I can to make sure it doesn't get there.
Thank you, Mr. Gaffney.
Are you finished with your presentation, Mr. Gavin?
Yes, sir.
Any other members, questions or comments of Mr. Gagnon's presentation? That was the time. No questions? Thank you, Mr. Gagnon. We'll move on to next item number 8, unfinished business, and nomination of chairperson and vice chairperson.
Yes, so at this point, what we do is open up the floor for potential nominations of chairperson. Anyone can nominate any other board member, or they can nominate themselves. Typically, you nominate another board member. I would suggest, and it's not a requirement, but it would make the most sense to have a full-time member in these positions, just in case we did have a full board. That might preclude the chairperson or vice chair, if they were the first or second alternate, from acting in that capacity. So historically, it's been a full-time member appointed to those positions. So at this point, the floor is open for nominations of chairperson.
Well, I'd like to nominate Mr. Edward Canuti for chairperson.
Any other members with nomination?
Thank you, Mr. Shepard, but I'm going to decline the nomination for chair. I've done it numerous times, and at this point, I respectfully decline. However, I would like to nominate Mr. McCoy, our current vice chair, to take over the seat as chair.
Any other members? Well, actually, I wanted to nominate Ms. Renee James again. I mean, I didn't really see an issue with the election of officers unless a member pointed it out. But I think my question a couple of weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago in our last meeting, was there a requirement, or is there an annual election of vice chair and chairperson? And I don't think there's an absolute requirement. So, with that, I don't have a problem with keeping Ms. James as chairperson, and I renew my nomination for Ms. James.
Okay. I think there was a requirement that came up a number of years ago that the chair can only do 2 terms, consecutive terms. And I can't remember, was is this her second term?
I believe this is her first.
Is it?
In this series. Historically, she's been chairperson. I don't know if that's an actual code requirement or if that was just the purview of the board. I think it was, if I remember correctly, just decided by the board as far as having different board members having the opportunity to serve as chair.
I believe it was. We had one long-term chair, and I think the board at that time decided that it would be better to rotate the position periodically. So, but I'm okay with the nomination of Ms. James for another term as chair. So, in that, I will withdraw my nomination for Mr. McCoy.
Then I will nominate Roger McCoy as vice chair. Is this your second time as vice chair? Or?
Yeah.
But before we move to vice chair, the floor is still open for the chairperson.
So,
Mr. Gagnon, does Ms. James
excuse me, 1 second. Mr. Blackwell, you did understand what he said, so we're still on chairperson now. Okay, so you acknowledge Ms. Shepard.
Does Ms. James have to be here? Because that's something I really thought about, since this is her going into her second term, and they're new, to kind of keep it even with her being here to continue as chair. But does she have to be here to accept that nomination?
I would say technically no, but it would make more sense that she be present. I guess it's something that we could push off to the next board meeting if the board chooses to do so. I do agree that her being present would be an important aspect, just because if she does not wish to continue as chair, she would have the opportunity to say so.
I wish that we would table this until she's here. She's been here for a while, and I think it would be only fair that she's here in body to accept or not. She can kind of move us along, and I was trying to think of, since Mr. Coy was vice chair, just keep it as it is to move on, but keep everything stable as we come into a new set of members.
Understood.
So I wish you would just table this until Ms. James get here at the next meeting. Stay focused.
Do we have a consensus of the board to table the item to the next meeting?
Give me a motion to table a second and act on it.
Well,
Stay away from these consensus.
before we entertain any motions, I just want to allow anybody on the board, whatever your feedback or whatever your comments is, I guess now would be appropriate to make those comments on whether or not we should have a vote on chair and vice chair. Members?
Mr. McCoy.
Mr.
But this is a learning process for me, so I would rather for it to stay as it is also.
Stay in its explain.
Capacity.
Okay. Any other members? Is there a motion? Well, I guess do we close the floor and then, because, you know, if I'm not interested in it and she's not here to acknowledge, I mean, do we just close the floor and entertain a motion?
I believe it was suggested that an official motion be made to table it, and then if it's seconded, then we'll have a roll call vote and move on from there.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
You're acknowledged, Mr. Gustafson?
I'll make a motion to table vice chair and chairperson for at least till the next meeting.
The election.
Second it.
Just before you put the second, can you clarify just so we can understand?
I make a motion for the vice chair position and the chairperson position to be tabled until the next meeting.
And that's the election of those positions.
And that's the election of those positions.
Is there a second?
Second.
It was moved by Mr. Gustafson and seconded by Mr. Blackwell.
Anthony Brown.
Yes.
John Gustafson.
Yes.
James Callen.
Yes.
Margaret Shepherd.
Yes.
Edward Kennedy.
Yes.
Corey Blackwell Sr.
Yes.
Charlie McCoy.
Yes.
Unanimous voting, motion approved.
Thank you. Item number 8B.
Letter B is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Riviera Beach, Palm Beach County, Florida, amending Chapter 31 of the city's Code of Ordinances entitled Zoning, Article 1 in general, Section 31-1 definitions, and Article 6 supplemental district regulations by creating Section 31-559 entitled Regulations for Filling Stations, aka gas stations, in order to provide and amend definitions and to provide separation requirements between filling stations, to promote diversified development patterns within the city, providing for conflicts, severability, and codification, and providing for an effective date. So board members, if you recall, at our last meeting, we did discuss this item. I know that the new board members we have tonight is their first meeting. Were also present, although they weren't sworn in at the time. However, they were here to at least listen to the discussion and listen to the previous presentation. This has been initiated by staff. What we're looking to do is create separation requirements between filling stations, which are really retail gas stations. We feel it's important to do so because there's becoming to be an oversaturation of these uses within the city. Within the staff report is defined that there's 18 filling stations within the city limits, which is approximately 2 per square mile. In comparison, North Palm Beach has an approximately 7, which is 1.9 per square mile. And Palm Beach Gardens, which is a much larger land area, has 13 filling stations, which is about a quarter of a filling station per square mile. Additionally, staff had provided a matrix of other ordinances utilized by adjacent municipalities as far as regulations for filling station uses and whether or not they had separation requirements or any other special exception approval required to approve those uses. The city currently does require special exception approval within the general commercial zoning district. However, there is not a separation requirement that's currently on the books.
Mr. Gagnon, if I can interrupt you, did you just say there's a special exception requirement within the general industrial zoning district?
General commercial.
General commercial.
Yes, sir.
So it's not citywide that there's a special exception? Or is it that filling stations can only be in general commercial?
I believe within general commercial and also within our downtown mixed-use zoning districts, it can only be provided, it being a filling station, can only be provided on any of those parcels within those zoning districts if they go through a special exception approval process.
Okay. And I apologize for interrupting your presentation, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear. Are those the only two zoning districts that we're allowed to have filling stations? Because I didn't see the zoning map when I reviewed this.
Yeah, I believe that filling station uses or storage of petroleum is allowed in other zoning districts in the city. So the general industrial zoning district may allow a similar use. However, it wouldn't be through a special exception process. So this separation requirement would be that much more valuable if there's already an existing filling station adjacent to industrial locations.
So in general industrial, essentially they're permitted by right?
I believe that's the case. I'd have to double check. I wonder if staff can pull up that code section.
Okay, well, I want to allow you to finish your presentation, but I wanted to make sure I got clarification on that, and then I'll ask some follow-up questions a little later. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and it's an important question to ask as well. I should know it off the top of my head, but you got me in that one. So, this separation requirement is really mostly pertinent to commercial locations in the city, as you can see from the map. And let me just discuss it briefly. So this is Blue Heron Boulevard running east and west through the city. This is US 1 running north and south. This is President Barack Obama Highway, also running north and south. And North Congress Ave running north and south. Here's I-95. So each green dot represents an existing filling station, and the yellow outline surrounding the green dot is a 1,000-foot radius from that point. And what the current ordinance proposes is a separation between these uses of 1,000 feet. So that's what those yellow circles represent. The red circle is proposed to have an exemption area from this requirement from the intersection of Interstate 95 and Blue Heron Boulevard. I know we discussed it at our last workshop meeting, and the board may feel otherwise about moving forward with that element. However, staff included it on the map still just to have further discussion on that matter. So at this point, I'll pull up the actual ordinance that's being proposed. So page 2 of the staff report indicates an amendment to the filling station definition, which is section 31-1. So there's a few minor amendments within that definition. And the major amendment is section 31-559, regulations for filling stations. Anything you see that is underlined is new language. So all of this language is new and proposed to be put into the code structure. A is the separation requirement between filling stations. Number 1 is the 1,000-foot separation buffer. It also describes any development order that's provided for a parcel would also be considered to have an active filling station. So when staff was looking at this, the question was asked, let's say there isn't a gas station in the intersection and 2 applicants apply at the same time, because the use hasn't been constructed and isn't active, the buffer really wouldn't apply. So that way we can say if we have somebody that's going through the approval process and once approved, that 1,000-foot buffer would come into effect. Underneath 1, so 1A, is description of the 2,000-foot intersection point from Interstate 95 Blue Heron Boulevard, which would be that exemption from the 1,000-foot separation requirement. So I'd like to open the floor for board questions at this time.
Well, I just want to make sure that we proceed, with the interest of the public comments that we have. So, members, if you have any questions of the presentation, and of what Mr. Gagnon has already laid out, now will be the time, and I would ask that we reserve any comments, if you can, until after we hear public comments. So if you have questions of the presentation, you may do so now. Mr. Blackwell, you're acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Mr. Gagnon, in reference to the 1,000-foot buffer,
Yes, sir.
the other cities that were mentioned within the presentation here, what buffer or if they are using a buffer for their cities?
Let me pull up the specific sheet. So the final page within the hard copy packet has a title of Filling Station Matrix, and that was staff research from adjacent municipalities and municipalities in Palm Beach County and how they handle filling stations. So let me pull up the digital copy as well here.
I apologize, I never got to the back page.
No, that's perfectly fine, and now's the time to talk about it. So when we look through other municipalities and how they handle this use, there are some that require additional architectural features and other treatments to the site. There are some that have separation requirements, not necessarily between filling stations, but between existing uses such as a church or a school in the filling station that's being proposed. There's one that's rather complicated. I believe it's the Juno Beach requirement, where there's almost a triangulation that's required to identify where a new fuel service station can be located. So it seems like every municipality has really their own unique way of permitting this use, but it seems as if the trend is that most locations identify this as something that is more dense and intense than a typical everyday use. So there's some additional protections that are put in place.
Thank you for your indulgence. Yes, sir. I didn't get to the back page.
Any other members wishing to ask a question of the presentation?
Mr. Chair,
You're recognized, Mr. Canuti.
did staff ever calculate the amount of actual pumps stations in total? Because some of these stations are small,
Right.
and someone like the Wawa, has quite a few pumping stations.
We didn't look into specific amount of fuel pumps per location during this study. The one municipality that does identify that is Jupiter, where they actually regulate the number of fuel stations or fuel pumps at the station as part of the review process. However, the staff didn't look at each station here, so it could be something that is limited in the future or described by the Planning and Zoning Board to potentially be limited, because currently you could have an approval of X amount of fuel pumps, and you just fill in the blank depending on the size of the site and what the economic demand is. So there really aren't any limitations on the number of fuel pumps currently.
Yeah, because that's really the driver for the traffic. How many stations. The other question I have, you mentioned the zoning areas where it's allowed by special exception, and in industrial they're not allowed. They're allowed without a special exception.
But actually, staff was able to pull up the General Industrial Code, and it describes storage of petroleum, but not retail fuel sales. So from staff analysis now, it does not appear as if it's a permitted use within general industrial.
Okay. Should we modify the ordinance to limit it to the two areas that we discussed?
Well, if the code is silent on a specific use, normally that's considered not permitted. So if there are 3 uses that are identified within a general industrial zone and the fueling station isn't one of them, then it's considered not a permitted use.
Okay, thank you. No other questions?
Any other members? Well, I'll take the opportunity to ask and kind of follow up with the comments from Mr. Canuti, but I don't even understand what your definition of mixed use is, because the land use map doesn't identify what mixed use is. The land use zoning map.
There's a specific section that's labeled downtown mixed use, and that really, for the most part, mirrors the CRA overlay. And then there are 3 specific zoning districts that are utilized to implement that future land use. So there's a downtown core zoning, downtown general zoning, I guess there's a few others. There's downtown residential and downtown industrial as well, but those are less frequently utilized in the city.
But the purposes of industrial, you said because the code is silent, it's understood that it's not allowed.
Right, so if under the permitted uses, if a specific use isn't identified, then typically staff would view that as being not a permitted use, because there could be a million different uses that we'd have to plug in as permitted or not permitted uses.
But, I don't want to stretch this out more than it has to be, but it would appear that petroleum storage place that we do know of, I don't believe that's identified.
Which location?
The one off of Gardens Road. And if I could share with our members, I had a question when I first reviewed this packet, but there is on Gardens Road, just north Interstate, there is what they call a fleet filling station. It's right next to Annalay's, and it's a gas station, but it's not a retail gas station. And what happens is companies or businesses that have fleet accounts with this filling station, they just pull up there, use some sort of transponder card or something, and they fill up. And my whole concern was, if we're going to regulate this, should we be looking for not just retail gas stations, and should we be expanding to commercial filling stations that fill up fleet vehicles, like let's say a cargo van or a van like that? Because, for all intents and purposes, I just don't see that we should have. I think we're at capacity irrespective of where we put it at. I think we have more than enough gas stations. And I just wanted to find out, was this not a use? And after I spoke to Mr. Gagnon, he explained that because it's not a retail establishment where someone would actually go into a brick and mortar building and pay for gas, then it's considered petroleum storage. So,
where exactly are you referring to?
It's on Gardens Road, south of Blue Heron Boulevard.
Okay.
And it's just south of, I think the school is Riviera Beach Preparatory Academy. So it's immediately south of that.
If you look on the map currently on the screen, I believe it's in this area, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. McCoy.
And, when I thought of it, just like you, we don't even realize it's there until you actually drive there and you actually look over there. But I was just in that area, and it seems as if, if we're going to make an attempt at regulating filling stations, we shouldn't limit them to retail, because there's nothing to stop a petroleum storage place from pulling up and, going off of Lewis terminals in that area by the UPS facility, So, those are the kind of concerns that I had with it. And I just wanted to make sure that, we took a holistic approach and seeing if there was something additional that, we should look at expanding this language to cover. And quite honestly, I think a special exception is appropriate for all zoning districts, because I want to be able to have an opinion and have an opinion by the police department, the fire department, and the various departments, utilities, how it all fits in with the adjacent uses. And I think having a special exception process allows us to a little more latitude to vet out these projects and see if they fit. So, I don't want to trample on the work that has been done, but I know certainly at some point we need to keep our minds open that, we're essentially regulating the retail ones, but there are other forms of filling stations that can come into the city. So
If I may, with that being said, is that fleet a private-owned entity, or is it, because with the sheriff's office, we had fleet filling stations ourselves throughout the county, but that was the county's fueling stations for law enforcement or county workers. Is this a privately owned fleet fueling station, or is this something that a government entity is using or utilizing, or both?
For the definition purposes of the code, if it's not a retail use available to the public, then it doesn't meet the current code definition. And I hear the chairperson's concerns and comments. For this ordinance, at this time, it may have additional unintended consequences, though, because staff hasn't fully researched what other private or government filling stations may exist. For example, our Public Works Department has fueling capabilities as well. So I think it's important to look at. I'm not trying to say that it's not important to look at, but as far as the scope of this ordinance, I think there's more of an immediate need to try to, curb the existing demand, specifically along the principal arterial roadways of the city.
But to your question, Mr. Blackwell, I'm almost certain that it is private, meaning it's not a government-owned or operated fleet filling station. But, to his point, I certainly think we need to have language in place, but I will hope that we're cognizant of, we need to come back and make sure that if we're going to, stop filling stations, let's do it for retail purposes as well as for commercial and fleet vehicles. But I think that commercial and fleet vehicles is something that we can certainly look at in the future. But, here now, I would even go so far to say, based off of the language, that we should do this regulations that way we can keep 1,000-foot radius from a petroleum station as it exists now. So, just expand it. But those are just my thoughts. I shared that with staff prior to the meeting, but I just wanted to make sure that, the members of the board knew exactly, that there are some things that are very close, but just outside the actual definition. So, but, it's something that, and I guess to our new board members, when you see these projects come before the board and you get an agenda packet, I think is very important. And one of the rights that we have is to kind of take a look at some of how our city is laid out. And when you go to various places, you can kind of relay those comments back to staff or bring them into a public meeting. Why do we have a fleet filling station and we're not regulating that along with retail establishments? So those are my comments on that. Any other members?
Yes, Mr. Gagnon.
Yes, ma'am.
How long have that fleet station been there? Do you have any idea?
It's been there, I would say, at least since I've been here, so 10 years at least.
I worked right there. It's been there a while.
Mr. Brown says 10 years.
It's been there about 10 years. And I noticed that different, trucks pull up there and gas up. What company owned that particular fleet? Because it's been there about 10, 12 years, because it's down from the, where the bus, the school buses. So it's down a little further from there. And I think during the storm, I even saw, Coca-Cola pull up there and kind of gas up. So is this open to the public, or just what is it?
I'm not positive on the ownership information, so staff would be happy to research that. From my understanding, it's not open to the general public, so it's only fleet services. So I don't know if they use a specific key fob type of system, but it's not a location where you can just pull up and buy gas at a retail level. So I'll be happy to look into it further, though.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm not familiar with this operation either. If I'm understanding you correctly, though, it is for, they're doing basically commercial trucks.
Mhm.
Commercial vehicles, so it could be, it could be vans, cars, could be trucks.
Okay, but basically they're all commercial vehicles that are
Commercial in nature.
For
yes.
business use, I think is the better question. Business use is probably,
Right, so not personal use, it'd be
Yeah.
business use vehicles.
even though they may fill up a small compact car, or they may even fill up a
Right.
tractor trailer.
That's what I was trying to be
So
clear on.
it varies.
Okay.
Okay. Any other members? Questions of the presentation?
Yeah, it stimulates another question. We just approved the Palmtran contractor on, I'm trying to remember, it was, they were going to have a fleet operation storage area. And I wondered, I don't recall them ever saying anything about fueling on that site. And it was off of Congress,
Yes.
just before you get to Martin Luther
I
King.
think it was off of 10th Street. I believe that the project was Maruti. And I think that it's funny you mentioned that because I think that there's a different site plan that's moving through the process now. I don't remember there being any fueling element associated with that previous site plan.
Yeah. I guess we should be aware of that when that type of project comes before us.
Definitely.
Well,
No
and
other questions?
that's exactly why I think, regardless of where it's at, be it industrial or mixed use or commercial, we need to have a special exception process because that allows us to use a little bit more. When I say us, I mean us as the city, the various departments and the board to vet these out a little more thoroughly as opposed to they just put in a site plan application and we have to allow them to be here because they're not specifically excluded. But a site plan has to go through the review of every single, I think almost every department that touches or affects that business. So if there's no other questions of the presentation, now this is just of the presentation, I would like to open up the 2 public comment cards that we have. So any other members with a question? Hearing none, we'll jump right into public comments. And first person is Mr. Lloyd Brown.
Good evening. This first time I came in for that, but what I was thinking about, I hear you talking about the gas stations, right? But right here on this corner here.
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, Lloyd Brown. I'm sorry, Lloyd Brown. My mother's name was Lucy Brown. My dad's name was Tom Brown. I just want you to know my mother taught me right. My father did too. Anyway, the reason I'm up here talking about the gas stations, okay, I can understand the 24-hour gas stations out by 95, if you regulate, I don't know if we regulate those. And I just can't understand the ones that are right directly in the crime areas. It's like, that's where all our problems are. I mean, right in the center, like, okay, on Broadway, I can understand you having a gas station 24 hours, honestly, because it's over there on Broadway, which is like a main thoroughfare, but right on Blue Heron and Obama Avenue right there, Obama Highway, okay, those 2 places, why would you sell gas in that area after dark? You think you're going to get, I'm not trying to say that any Caucasians and come over there at 2 o'clock in the morning to buy gas. They sell cigarettes. They sell loose cigarettes, both stores, not just the gas stations, but the stores also too in those areas that are 24 hours. That's like, who let this happen? I mean, that's ridiculous because those areas, that's like a nest egg for crime right there. Who's going to hang out at a gas station in a 24-hour store except for thugs, drug addicts, and people trying to purchase drugs? And I believe if we need to do something about those places, I think it'll be easier for us to live in this city. I mean, If you got rid of those 24-hour gas stations that's right in the crime areas, but you can come over there and you arrest a guy for hanging in the crime area, but he's only hanging there because there's a place for him to hang 24 hours a day. And then early in the morning, up by the Imperial, that's the other gas station, they stay open 24 hours. I don't know what he mean by dual use, but anyway, these places, they got restaurants in them, no bathrooms. They don't sell gas at night. They sell everything that, I was on drugs, I know. They sell everything that a drug addict need. Paraphernalia, rolling papers, alcohol, and they got the drug dealers right on the side. But they open 24 hours, they're supposed to be gas stations. Yeah, it's gas, all right. It's according to which type of gas you're talking about. Because I just can't see it. I think if we got rid of these, at least the ones that are within our city, I hope you don't stop me, but the ones that are in our general area, and we got rid of those, I think this city might be a little more cleaner and a little more less crime, because those guys only hang there because it's open. And most of those guys that hang there, they don't care nothing about it. And the stores don't really care anything about the neighborhood. They're there to make money. They're not selling gas. Now, honestly, who you expect to get off 95, pass by all those gas stations out there, and come right in here to Riviera Beach, to the one right on Obama and Blue Heron, unless they were coming to purchase drugs. That's what I'm trying to say, and I appreciate you listening to me. Y'all have a nice day.
Next comment is Mary Brown.
Good evening, new board members. Miss Mary Brown, Riviera Beach. Good to see men in the house. Margaret and Miss James, you all will hold your weight well. Thank you, as a Lord. The ball dropped. It just did not drop here. It been dropped. City staff has frequently received inquiries from the developers. It also should have been included residents, because we have been in these chambers numerous of times talking about the filling stations in this city here. If you say 1,000 feet, you have 2 filling stations right here where City Hall sits. The Tiger store there. So let's say 3 that stay open 24/7. This did not happen by accident at all. This is ludicrous. An 8-mile stretch of territory. It's a difference when you do not live here and you see the harm of coming in, investing in what you invest in. We welcome the business, but it's how and what business regulates and puts that perception on us as a city, who we are. No one travels from I-95 24 hours a day to go over on Singer Island or coming back. You even got the Imperial down there 24/7. Who did this madness? Who did this madness? We hold the officials accountable for this madness. This should have had moratoriums. It should have had better regulations. Mr. Knudden made mention about the pump stations. You haven't said in there. You need to put some teeth in these regulations here. You need to put some teeth in this comprehensive plan here that is delegating and will set the course for what we as a city, who we are and whose we are, would look like on every corner in this city here. Mr. Brown talks about it all the time. The residents talks about it too. So in that, Jeff, I would like for you also to include the residents has always had a major concern about these gas stations. Pumps, how many pumps does a filling station should be regulated in this city? Is it 2 or 1? You have Wawa that just opened up. That's marvelous. You have the health station that's going over on Singer Island. You have JW down the street on 6th Street, and he has a liquor store up on the Dixie here. They do not stay open 24/7. You also have on MLK on Congress down there, where you have the Marathon Station. They do not stay open 24/7. I know, I think down there on Congress and MLK, I think that closes by 11 o'clock. And if I'm incorrect, you all can, I'm sure that you all have been that way before, because I travel that way. JW down there, he doesn't stay open 24/7. This is horrible for this city. It's horrible for the residents that live in these perimeters, and it's horrible for the people that are coming off I-95 going toward the waters, are living over there as well. We have a chance now to modify this. To modify this. You got a chance to correct this. And you got a chance to go back and say that these filling stations cannot be allowed to operate 24/7. Nobody's buying gas 24/7. The hub is right here where the crime is. Right across from City Hall here. Let your minds picture that. And from here to right down there to the Imperial Plaza. Let your minds picture that. Something is wrong with this picture here. Something has been wrong. But you all have a chance to do what is right. Look at these land regulations and uses. Modify. This board has that authority. And a lot of this stuff here that's being presented is not fully vetted. I'm holding you all men and women accountable for how this city is perceived. And we must stop doing business as usual. The buddy system pack. What are they selling in those stores 24/7? That should be better regulated. You work with the sheriff department. I'm sure you've had your hands full with this type of chaos. Others have worked into entity where you see all kinds of chaos. I don't know who lives in this city, but I'm assuming that everyone lives in this city. And your desire should be just like Miss Brown and her children's desire, because even in the morning times, children walk past those stores there and see all of that chaos going on. It is not acceptable. And we should not allow our children to feel as if that it is acceptable and this is how we live. Our kids portray and live and act out the way and what we do and see and say. Thank you.
Thank you. Those were our public comments. The agenda now calls for board comments. So any members of the board wishing to comment?
If I may, Chair or Vice Chair.
Mr. Blackwell, you're recognized.
Thank you. Hearing public comments, I do take these matters seriously, and I do hear you. The items that are here before us today have no language in it as far as hours of restrictions or modifications of that. So with that being said, and this is a question for Mr. Gagnon, could this language also be included in the restrictions or the mixed uses of filling stations? I know it's a separation of code and ordinances, but I'm just asking as a matter of...
Yeah, I think it's something that could be investigated further as far as hours of operation for businesses. The scope of that, however, may end up being much larger than just filling stations, because it seems as if there's also a retail component that is really being questioned, which would definitely require much more thorough analysis than just the filling stations. Currently, I don't believe there's any restriction on hours of operation within our code of ordinances. There is for alcohol sales, but I think that's the only specific use that's outlined as far as having a time structure. So we would have to go back and and look and see again what other municipalities have done, what the city may be able to do legally, and how that would apply to other retail uses in the city.
Okay. I understand that we're here today for the 1,000-foot buffer, so to speak, for new and existing filling stations, but based on the public comment, I just wanted to ask that question and inquire. Thank you.
Understood.
Any other members wishing to comment?
Yes, I would like to make a comment.
You recognize.
Thank you. Mr. Gagnon, how many more filling stations can we take here in the city? We have 18, and I keep hearing Mr. Brown continuously bring it up about the filling stations. Is there any way we could put a hold on what come into the city? Because you have Broadway, Blue Heron, we need to build that up with restaurants, not dollar stores, restaurants, not filling stations. Is it any way, I know if the investors have land here, we can't restrict them from building, but is there any type of legislation they could put in place to restrict these?
I guess to provide the most wide sweeping answer I can, I don't know if there's really one way of solving it. You know, I think right now the city's going through kind of a reimagination process. We've had a lot of discussion of the US 1 corridor, of the Blue Heron corridor. There's currently a moratorium in place which allows for development of regulations such as this, where staff is looking at the existing uses and seeing what may be becoming oversaturated in the city. So from my perspective, enacting smaller regulations such as this to help guide us to where we want to be, I think it helps. It may not be the silver bullet, but it starts getting us to what our final goal really is for how the city will eventually be developed.
And I want Mr. Brown to know that I know I hear him. I myself go out in the city and I watch all of the filling stations and the things that he's talking about, but we have to get a solution to the problem here in the city. We have a great city. We don't want to be labeled as the filling station or the dollar store city. So I think we should start thinking about putting some restrictions there, because I think we have enough. 18 is 18, really too many. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to comment?
I have a comment, Vice Chair.
Mr. Gustafson, you're recognized.
With the city wanting to move forward in a new direction and a new imagination, is there any way that we could put in the verbiage some type of architectural, I mean, we're looking at Jupiter here, and they have so many different points of view that they have to meet and clarify. I agree, 18 filling stations is too many, and we have to put some type of wording in the rule that says if they want to put a gas station here and be the 19th gas station, are they going to put it at some type of new architectural form that would meet the city and also influence the city in a positive direction with landscaping, trees, screening, and so forth. And I think that maybe if we change the wording a little bit to make it a little bit harder to put a gas station here, it's going to cost that developer more money and so forth. If he really wants to do it, he has to keep it to a standard that the board wants to do. And that would, I would think, would bring the city to a new imagination to get better.
Yeah, to build off that comment, I think that during our last workshop meeting, a similar thought process was discussed where I don't know if specifically for filling stations, if that's the best answer, or maybe we need to look at kind of the global view of how we develop our major roadways and whether or not we need to strengthen what architectural standards we have and what development guidelines we have as far as building design and landscaping and things of that nature. So I don't know if it's best to try to look at just the filling station or just the corridor as a whole.
And back to that, the corridor is something that we have to look at, but the types of facilities that are going to try to move into the city, if we can start with the gas stations, which seem to be trouble points, and we keep them to a higher architectural standard, it might, and even if, I'm sure it's very difficult with a retail store with selling retail items that it's difficult to regulate when they can be open or not. But if that facility is held to a higher architectural standard, it might be a place of more luxurious that it may keep the trouble away. Because that type of owner that wants to keep that facility and make money at that facility is also going to make sure that he doesn't have trouble outside of this facility. So I'm just looking at the gas stations and to move in that direction, which could also help the corridor of the balance.
Any other members?
Yes.
Mr. Brown, you're recognized.
Mr. Gagnon,
Can you make sure you're speaking to the mic?
will the actual developments go through this board? If somebody
Yes.
wants to develop a property, it has to go through this board, right?
That's correct. So specifically for the gas stations, it would provide the board the opportunity to review it. It would be a special exception process, so there's additional criteria that the developer would have to meet currently. And then once the Planning and Zoning Board viewed it, it would go to City Council for final approval or denial.
Okay, so this is just a regulation approval right now.
Yes, this is not for any specific project. This is a global ordinance that would impact future development in the city.
Thank you.
Any other members?
Mr. Chair,
You're recognized, Mr. Canuti.
does it make sense to put a upward limit on the number of gas stations in the city? Finite limit?
So as far as a cap on the number of filling stations, or are we talking about just the pumps at?
No, number of filling stations. And is that even possible?
The city currently doesn't have any sort of use caps of that manner, so staff would have to research what's been implemented elsewhere and what's successful. As far as growth management practices, similar type of things have occurred, but I'm just not as familiar of how to implement that strategy.
Is it worthwhile to investigate that?
Yes, definitely.
No other questions at this time?
I have a few comments, and I want to kind of stick to the issue at hand, and then I have some other side comments to state because of what we came up with. But I remember when we had this item 2 weeks ago, it was stated, Mr. Gagnon, and if you could just refresh our memory about why we have the exemption for the area near I-95 and Blue Heron Boulevard. And what drove that reason, and how did we get there to have that exemption, that carve out for that little section?
Yes, so when staff was looking at the map, we wanted to take into consideration the fact that Interstate 95 is considered an evacuation route for the area. So Blue Heron Boulevard would be also a primary evacuation route. So providing that exemption to the buffer would allow for filling station uses to develop within the, again, what staff considers an evacuation route buffer zone, I guess for lack of a better term. However, there was discussion during the last meeting that maybe it wasn't needed, and I think it's really up to the Planning and Zoning Board to consider it, and it could be something that is removed if the board doesn't feel as if it's necessary.
Okay. Part of the reason I asked is because I don't think it's necessary that we need to make an exception. And, I'm looking at it from the oversaturation standpoint of the number of filling stations, and I'm looking at it also from the standpoint of gas is toxic. You know, I mean, it's definitely flammable, and we have to know where filling stations are. We have to know what petroleum storage is. We have to know where, you know, we have a whole, I can probably tell you, we had at least 3 or 4, maybe even 5 different industrial truck facilities or repair facilities that came in off of the Blue Heron and Gardens Road area that do repair and maintenance. That I'm sure they have some portable storage of diesel and, you know, just a number of different hazardous materials. We had air gas. So I just think from a standpoint, there shouldn't be any exemptions. You know, if we all look at our last page on our packet, you know, I mean, it kind of gives you, they have some pretty tight language. And I don't see that ours is so tight. In fact, ours is a little bit loose, and I think we need to, you know, 8 just between Military Trail and I want to say Avenue S is probably an oversaturation of gas stations. I don't think we need a carve out. So, you know, if I can call the members' attention just to the language, I think Section A, in my opinion, is unnecessary because looking at the land use map, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Gagnon, but it appears that just that 1,000 feet around I-95, that area, actually I have it on my computer, but it's in, I want to say a color almost like a burgundy, but that represents commercial. And if I understood correctly, just being in commercial requires a special exception already.
Yes.
So that would essentially mean it has to go through that whole vetting process anyways. So that would, in essence, make Part A of the language a little bit, and I don't want to say overkill, but almost fruitless at this point. So I particularly don't like the exception. Secondly, just dealing with the 1,000 foot separation buffer, was there a was there a standard in which we arrived to 1,000 feet? Is that obviously it's not local best practices, because I see 1,000 feet for Palm Beach Gardens with some other requirements, but you know, I think just where we are, because we already have 18 feet, I think we can even go down to 500. I'm sorry, not down to 500. We can go up to 2,000. That's my opinion. So, I mean, and I welcome feedback from the other members. Also, in addition to going up to 2,000, I would ask, and I would read what I think my proposal is for that language. It says and I'm changing my 1,000 to 2,000 for the regulation for filling stations. And my version would read as this, if you kind of want to follow it. Separation requirements between filling stations. A 2,000 foot separation buffer is required between filling stations. And I would propose that we add a comma and add petroleum storage as well. So that way we won't, like for instance, if that language was there, Wawa would not be allowed to be in existence because we have a petroleum storage which just maybe 1/8 of a mile to the south. So particularly, I don't want to limit it to filling stations. I don't want someone to find some backdoor area to come into our city in the industrial area to put a petroleum storage, which essentially goes against the whole purpose of us trying to lay out some regulations to decide on where these facilities to go. So it would be a comma and petroleum station. So not necessarily saying that we regulate petroleum stations, but we don't want a filling station within 2,000 feet of an existing petroleum station. So that's my proposal with the language. And, you know, if there's other members that feel the same, I mean, I would certainly ask that you, kind of share your opinion and your thoughts on it. Now, if I could just shift gears for just a little bit, because I have my computer here and the luxury of having a computer, I was able to look at the code, and I know I heard it mentioned about the closeness of these facilities, and Mr. Brown spoke of Barack Obama Highway and Blue Heron. Now, I remember the fueling station on the southwest corner. I don't know if it's a Marathon or whatever it is, or Rec 90 or whatever they call it. that filling station, but it was closed for some time. It wasn't the Chevron; it's the one on the southwest corner. And
where the mobile
is it mobile?
It's mobile.
Okay. Well, and I guess this is for our members as well. So when we put language in place like this, and let's just say this passes us and goes through 2 readings on city council, if a filling station goes out of business, I believe it's for 6 months, that use is no longer required. I'm sorry, let me say that. That use is no longer allowed. And I think, am I correct, Mr. Gagnon?
Yes.
So if there is another filling station within the defined radius, if this ordinance was approved, it may create legal non-conforming uses, meaning that 2 uses would exist within that specific radius. So if one of the 2 uses were to close for that defined amount of time, it would not be able to reopen as a filling station use.
Okay. And, I wanted certainly our members to understand that legally non-conforming clause and what that actually means and the impact of it, because, we can't go in and tell somebody we don't want a filling station if they've already been existing and they're already in operation. But, if they close for whatever reason, beyond the 6 months, is it for whatever reason?
Well, it would be closed, lacking any sort of city license. So, for example, if I'm a business owner and I am seasonal and I choose to have my shop open for half the year and I maintain my city license, then that would still be considered an active business. But if the business was completely shut down with no active city business license, then the non-conforming use regulations could come into play.
Okay. Well, that is one of the impacts, whether it be intended or unintended. So certainly be aware of that. And also, you mentioned that there is ordinance, and I didn't get a chance to actually find it. There is ordinance that restricts alcohol purchases, or not purchases, the selling of alcohol at a certain hour. My issue is this, and I'm going to be straightforward with you. I liked it that we had our city manager in our first 2 meetings. If he can't come, because I know he manages, I think, 13 departments or however many departments and over 400 employees and has a personal life, we should have some designee or someone here from the city manager's office so that it's not always someone has to review the record to find out what planning and zoning, intended, or some of the comments that came up. Because, this is important, and none of this stuff comes to light until an individual comes to a public meeting. But is there any enforcement of the alcohol being sold after these restricted hours? Because I never even heard of or even knew of any kind of enforcement. Who does it? The police department? Code enforcement? It's like we need to, I'm at the point, if I could hit delete, I want to delete everything out of our code. Because if we're not using it, we should delete it. And the fact that it's there means that it is enforceable. And if we're not enforcing it, it makes no sense for us to have it in our code. And I struggle because I deal with, and I've spoken to the mayor several times as well as the city manager, and I have to agree with the public comments. These places breed the criminal element. When you have people outside at all times of the night, and we have a store that's dispensing alcohol or whatever they're doing and loitering, and that's just fueling, this kind of activity, that's why we have shootings, and that's why we have robberies and a number of different things. But I want to find out, can we as a board make a request that's separate from this item that we're discussing, that the city manager or administration of the city provides us some sort of information on how, some of these things that we're seeing is being enforced? Because if there's no enforcement, I think, that is not so much a proactive way, but that is a way that we can kind of limit some of these things and attract better businesses into the city, because this is a balancing act that we have as being appointed members, that we recognize these things and bring them to the forefront. So I definitely want to ask about the enforcement mechanism of some of these existing statutes. And lastly, is there of that 24 hour, I'm sorry, not the 24 hours, of the restriction on purchases of alcohol does that function, and this may be a question for the city attorney, does that regulation, is that something that is proposed, or is that a function of our board when it comes to reviewing land use ordinances as well as applications? Because I know we've made recommendations with conditions. So is that a function? Can we actually put that in language as a recommendation to city council?
Yes.
We can. We have that authority.
Yes.
Okay. So, with that being said, members, I think, our attorney laid it out so eloquently that we can receive whatever kind of legal advice from him. It's up to, advisory board members to make that recommendation. It's up to city council to make that decision. But I will caution you on this. If any member chooses to make any kind of recommendation, keep it separate from our land use and make another motion. Simply because I don't want to railroad the work that our planning department has done. Which, it's a little bit outside of their scope, and I think it deals more with the code enforcement side of it. But don't make a recommendation that's going to cause this language to crash somewhere down the line, being it too heavy with, because you don't get to vote yes, but conditions. You either vote yes or no. So if there is a motion or some sort of recommendation by members of the board, just if we could do it separately from what we've already worked on. So those are my comments. Any other members wishing to comment?
If I may, Chair.
Mr. Blackwell.
After reviewing the regulations and for filling stations on the back page, once again, Exhibit D here, I kind of agree with Chair here. If you look at our language, it's just pretty much a play on words. It's very vague. But if you go down to Lake Park and North Palm Beach, which are compatible cities to our square mileage, they have outlined a more complex and definitive regulatory statute or something. And I would like to see maybe a 2,000-foot separation buffer and the language of the comma petroleum storage, only because you look at that map there, and if it's going on in one place, well, who's precluded from going on off of Australian Avenue, where it's industrial mixed use there? But that 2,000-foot buffer may not reach the Australian Avenue plats or land. But if we add that language in there, comma, and petroleum storage facilities, maybe that may be, a way of addressing any future fleet or service stations that are not convenience stores or commercial use.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Any other members with comments?
Mr. Chair, if I could just say one more comment.
You're recognized, Mr. Gustafson.
I like the 2,000 feet, and I also like your petroleum, petroleum facility or storage facility. I just want to question that petroleum facility, and why not change the words to hazardous material or anything that is flammable or dangerous in the capacity of being next to a fuel storage or a fuel depot, fueling station, or so forth. Petroleum is just one type of material, and using the words such as hazardous materials or other types of flammables might make that a stronger, more difficult way to put a station there.
Thank you, Mr. Gustafson, and I want to be the first to respond and tell you I like the idea, but I just don't think that'll work. Because when you say hazardous material, I mean, just being on this board, we've had a number of different businesses that come in with hazardous material, and I mean, we just had a chlorine facility, so basically, we would be prohibiting air gas, which, because it's under, a lot of the products that they provide, be it oxygen or propane or whatever it is. I mean, we would just now be really, hazardous has so many different definitions, and I think we will find ourselves in more trouble if we, included hazardous. I think if we kind of keep it limited and take a one bite at a time, I think that's probably, in my opinion, a better approach. Because if you say hazardous, there is a whole list of hazardous materials, and then there has to be a whole nother process in defining what exactly is hazardous and knowing what's already existing. Now, just from the standpoint, when you think about something about the 2000, like I said, the exemption around 95, remember, members, we have 2 dealerships right at the intersection of I-95 and Blue Heron Boulevard. And I'm sure they have some sort of storage of some sort of gasoline or some sort of bulk oil or something of that sort, which essentially is petroleum. So I think it's best that we kind of limit it where we have succinct but definitely effective, definitions, as opposed not to have too many unintended consequences. So that's my concern with it. Any other members?
Yeah, just a question for staff. We've basically asked to modify this ordinance, okay, with eliminating the special exception in the 95 area, okay. Should we limit the total number of gas stations? We said a number of board members want to expand the distance to 2,000, okay. We don't mention anything in our ordinance about distance from schools, hospitals, et cetera, which a number of the other communities do. We're talking about a petroleum storage facility, but do we actually mean a petroleum storage and dispensing facility? So that's a question. And the other question is, why shouldn't any gas station, whether it be in commercial or mixed use, et cetera, be a special exception? So no matter where you go, it should be a special exception. So at least we have, a second bullet to fire at it. So, so my question to you is this: do we need to send this back to you and implement all of these different items? Because I think if we just pass this and say address these issues, we're going to lose something in the translation. So my question is it going to be easier for staff to implement these questions or conditions, and at the same time find out if we really can put a limit on the total and how we define a petroleum storage facility and dispensing facility. From just a housekeeping standpoint, is it better for you to go ahead and do that, rewrite it, bring it back here, and for next meeting?
Ultimately, it's going to depend on the motion made by the board. It's not, I guess, impossible for staff to make corrections or make any amendments as defined. However, if the board wishes to see amendments brought back, then staff can also do that and bring back the amendments discussed tonight and whatever is motioned by the board. If that would be a pleasure of the board and make all board members more comfortable with moving forward with that item.
I personally would feel better to read all of this stuff into the ordinance as opposed to, just saying, go ahead, we'll approve it and you put this in. So the other question I have is related to what Mr. McCoy said. Is if we do expand to the 2,000 feet, okay, and recommend that, and a gas station that's 500 feet away from a current one goes out of business, is that a strong enough reason to say it's now not a conforming use? Because the only reasons I say that is that mostly it's a zoning change, like we've had on Broadway, zoning changes that, somebody would have come back in and said, well, I used to have that kind of business here and now I want to do it again. So
would happen in a few situations if this ordinance, just using the 1,000 foot that is on paper currently for reference, if this ordinance as proposed was enacted, then it would create legal nonconformities with some of the existing gas stations, meaning that they are located within that buffer of another gas station. So by default, there would be a legal nonconformity created, whether or not they meet the requirements and conditions of going out of business for a set amount of days, and basically forfeiting that use is kind of a case-by-case basis.
Okay, but it would have to be the 180 days out of business, inactive,
Correct.
okay, in order for it to become non-conforming.
Yes.
Well, you know, if the board is comfortable with sending this back, implementing these items that we all brought up, I'll make that motion that we send the ordinance back to staff to modify it with all of the board comments.
And I won't recognize that motion, Mr. Kaluti, simply because I want to give you the opportunity. But let's just make sure that everybody is all clear on it. I'll allow you the opportunity to, take a stab at it. But is there any other members? And I definitely want to hear some feedback from staff because I don't want to.
Well, I think staff's already given the feedback. If it's the pleasure of the board to send it back to implement these things, so be it.
Right, and that's not so much the point that I was going to make, Mr. Kanuti, but they are, as well as the city attorney, subject matter experts, and I don't want them to go back right now without, like, for instance, is there an opinion or is there staff have a position, as it stands on some of the things that we've kind of suggested, or would be some pitfalls? Like, I know I was able to almost immediately tell Mr. Gustafson that might put us in trouble, but I want to kind of hear back from them as to our suggestions. If this is something that, us not being experts on it might not realize that it's going to affect us. And you certainly have the opportunity to make the motion, Mr. Kaluti.
What I'd say in response to that is whenever amendments are proposed, it requires additional research from staff level. I don't think there's anything that has been discussed that's a complete no-go. I think it will, however, require staff to go look and see how the petroleum storage facility is defined. If we have to create a specific definition for petroleum storage, there would have to be modification of the section heading because it would be for more than just the filling stations. It would also include petroleum storage. So I don't see any impossibilities, but again, we look at it, we'd create a new map that identified what a 2,000 foot buffer would be versus a 1,000 foot buffer as proposed, just for research and discussion purposes.
Okay. Any other members before we take any motions? I just want comments and questions at this point.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you're recognized.
Mr. DeGraffenreich.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have an opinion on this particular item that Mr. McCoy is discussing with staff going back and reiterating this particular item? Do you see any consequences or anything at all?
If I'm understanding correctly, the board is sending it back because there's some concerns that are discussed that they want addressed in order to perfect their recommendation before it goes forward.
Sure.
I think that's within your prerogative. If that's what you want to do, it is wise to do so. In my opinion, that ain't a legal answer, but if you have those issues before you can formulate your recommendation, I think it may be wise to do so.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other members? Well, Mr. Kanuti, you have a heavy task, and I want to make sure that you get all of the time to try to explain it in your motion what you want to see done.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple motion. It's to send the ordinance back and have it rewritten taking into consideration all of the comments that were made by the board and suggestions made by the board, knowing full well that some may be able to be researched and done, and there may be some that may not be able to be done for a variety of reasons. So, and I'm more comfortable in having that come back to us as opposed to just saying, okay, we made some general comments, implement them and set it on to city council. So I think we need to...
Prior to finalization of the motion, just so I can relay what staff's understanding of the discussion so far tonight has been, one amendment would be modifying the 1,000-foot separation to 2,000-foot separation. Another amendment would be adding petroleum storage or a similar defined use within that separation requirement. And additionally, there was discussion of removing the exemption specified within letter A for the 2,000-foot radius at the intersection point of Interstate 95 and Blue Heron Boulevard.
And making all gas stations a special exception, no matter where they go in the city. And in addition, having the buffer between schools and other facilities, as many of the other municipalities have.
2, 3.
So if I may, for that buffer, are you also suggesting a 2,000-foot buffer from those uses as well? I think what I found is the municipalities that do have a separation requirement from specific uses such as a school, they don't necessarily have a separation requirement from similar uses. So I fully understand what the board is requesting. It's a separation between identical uses being filling stations, separation between petroleum storage, and also separation between schools.
Sure, because I think the facility that Mr. McCoy referred to on Garden probably falls within 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet.
More like 200.
Okay, of the school.
But Mr. Canuti, if I could just interrupt you, and I apologize, but that almost goes to the same, point that I could have seen potentially happening with Mr. Gustafson's recommendation. And part of it is, I totally agree that we should probably do it within the schools and maybe even religious facilities. But until we have a layout of it where everything is, as far as schools and I mean, did you say religious facilities, or did you just say schools?
No, I said schools and other similar institutions. So that would certainly fall under it. But I think that's really staff's job to come back to us and say, we can't do 2,000 feet from schools or these other facilities. That has to be 1,000 feet, but we can do 2,000 feet for gas stations.
Well, and that's fine. But, I guess my question is it okay for us to include schools? Because, there's almost a school or related institution on every corner. Now, do we consider daycares as a school for that definition or purpose? So, I don't want to get too tied up in it. I certainly understand what you mean, but if we had, a list of schools, it'd probably be better to know if we should include that in there as opposed to sending him back to do it now. And he pops up and the definition of school encompasses 400 different, little parcels throughout our city, so I agree. If that's what you want to do, then by all means, but I just want to point out that schools is and related institutions is a pretty broad definition.
If I may, Chair, as well, I also want to express the need of having some regulations as soon as possible and the importance of that, because currently there is no separation requirement. So we do have a special exception approval process. However, there is no separation requirement. Staff does frequently get requests on fueling stations, whether or not they could potentially be approved in the city. So I don't disagree that the city needs to really contemplate really many aspects of our code which are outdated. However, if it's at all possible to move forward with this as a starting point, and then it's not something that can be added to in the future, because it seems as if what's being asked now is going to require additional staff research in order to provide a final product that's going to be reliable. So if that's the direction of the board, then honestly I'm not anticipating staff having the resources to complete it in the very near future.
And what part is so arduous? Is it the portion about the schools and the related institutions?
It's not really any one thing. I think it's just starting to turn into something very different.
Mr. Canuti, if I could...
Let me just ask a
Go
question. Let's take each step. Eliminating the exception around I-95.
Yes.
Okay. Does that take a lot of staff analysis to do?
Easy.
Expanding it to 2,000 feet between gas stations.
Relatively easy.
Okay. Petroleum storage and dispensing facilities.
We're going to have to look and see exactly how they're defined and then have a conversation with the board whether or not it meets the definition that the board intends.
So what about eliminating special exception or having all gas stations under a special exception?
That may require slightly more research. We'll have to look at each zoning code and implement accordingly.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is eliminating the expansion, okay, and the exception and expanding to 2,000 feet are pretty simple.
Yes.
Okay, and that's something that doesn't entail a lot of staff work.
Correct.
Okay. And how much staff work is involved in making all gas stations under the special exception? I mean, we know that they can't go in a whole lot of areas. It can only go in a...
It's not... I'm not concerned currently with the number of hours necessarily, but when the available staff will be able to bring it back to the board. And where this item is as far as priorities, being that we're not fully staffed currently and we're having other applications provided which may take precedence over this item. So the last thing I want to see is have this kind of get placed behind other items moving through the process. And it could happen if research and other things require much staff time.
Okay. All right.
Well, and Mr. Canuti, can I just offer this?
Well, let me ask you one more question. So you're basically saying that between now and the next meeting, okay, the two exception and expanded distance are easy enough to do?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then I will modify my motion, okay, and say that my motion now is to approve this with the eliminating the special exception and expanding the distance between stations to 2,000 feet.
Is that your motion?
Yeah.
So 2,000 feet in removing the special exception.
Correct. No. I said nothing of the special exception. I says the exception around I-95.
The exemption, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
exemption around I-95 and expanding the distance between similar uses to 2,000 feet. And as far as the special exception for all gas stations, I guess my suggestion is if you can get that done, okay, that just gives the city a hell of a lot more control over gas stations, which is what we're trying to do. So those three items would be in my motion.
It's been properly moved by Mr. Canuti. Is there a second?
Chair, before you second, I just want to make sure I'm clear. Did we also include the language of the petroleum storage use in that?
No.
No.
He said that's going to be difficult to do.
Okay,
So,
I'm clear.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been properly moved in second. And I want to ask one other question, and I hate to keep going back to here, but we got the exemption removal around the 95 area, and we're increasing the buffer to 2,000 feet. Wouldn't it be easier just to vote on those two items? And at this point, as it stands today, that can go right to City Council from here? And then Mr. Canuti makes a separate a separate motion saying that all filling stations come through by special exception, so not to hold up the process, so that we have something in place. At least we're addressing the exemption and we're increasing the buffer to 2,000 feet. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's possible because that's part of your discussion, but currently there's a motion on the floor.
Right, and I wanted to get clarification in case a substitute is
Yes, exactly.
possible. That is,
If Mr. Canuti wished to amend his motion, then that's definitely a possibility. And then, so there would be a motion to approve with a 2,000-foot radius versus 1,000-foot radius. And it would also include removal of an exemption from the 1,000-foot separation requirement shall be provided for any property located within 2,000 feet of the intersection point of Interstate 95 and Blue Heron Boulevard. And then, if Mr. Canuti chooses, he makes the additional motion separate that asks staff to go back and perform the research that we have discussed tonight.
okay, let's be clear. Eliminating the special exception, the exception around I-95.
Yes.
Okay, so that will now be 2,000 feet.
no.
So within the ordinance itself, it would be A1A. So the last text that's proposed would be eliminated altogether.
So yeah, this would be taken out altogether.
Okay, all right, yeah.
So A1A
That would be
removed.
A2, correct? Or B?
Yes,
All right,
sir.
yeah, just you're eliminating that one section.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that would be completely eliminated. And A1, which references the separation buffer currently at 1,000 feet, that would be modified to read 2,000 feet.
Okay. I'll modify the motion to be to limit it to those two. So in essence, we're approving the ordinance, and by eliminating the exception in the I-95 area and increasing the distance between stations to 2,000 feet. That's the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Canuti. We finally got there. It's been properly moved. Is there a second?
A second.
It's been moved and it's been second. Hearing no other board member comments, can we have the roll?
Anthony Brown,
Yes.
Johnny Gustafson,
Yes.
James Callum,
Yes.
Margaret Shepherd,
Yes.
Edward Canody,
Yes.
Corey Blackwell Sr.,
Yes.
Frederick McCoy,
Yes.
unanimously voting, motion approved.
Thank you. Mr. Canuti, if you're so inclined, you're recognized for another motion.
No, we'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. So we're not going to address the special exception, I guess just as a general recommendation to council, separate from the ordinance.
Well, it's a recommendation of staff, not the council, correct?
If the board wishes to make a motion just requesting staff to research this, I'd be happy to go through the existing code structure and identify each zoning code section to describe how filling stations are currently classified, just as another talking point, and the board can review that information and decide how to move forward.
Okay. I'll make the motion to have staff research special exceptions for filling gas stations as we defined it, and make all gas stations approval under the special exception.
It's been properly moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Canuti, and there was a second by Mr. Gallen. Roll call.
Anthony Brown,
Yes.
John Gustafson,
Yes.
James Gallen,
Yes.
Margaret Shepherd,
Yes.
Edward Kennedy,
Yes.
Corey Blackwell Sr.,
Yes.
Frederick McCoy.
Yes.
Unanimous voting, motion approved.
Thank you. We're moving on to item number 9, which is new business. Having none, I guess we'll jump right into general discussion. And I have 2 public comment cards. Is Mr. Lloyd Brown still here? Okay, Miss Mary Bram.
Miss Mayor Bram, Riviera Beach, thank you, board, for finally getting some teeth somewhere where it is much needed. It is other work to be done with this. I was listening to Jeff and the things that you all were trying to do. This is the elephant in the room about doing the business of the city. And when it comes down to these things that are critical to our city here, it should be no limitation on what we can do and what we shall do. Now, this board here delivers everything that comes in and goes out to our city. So we need to have it right, and we need to get it right. We need the things that are in place to make it workable, so that if the businesses are, because we welcome the businesses, but it's not what we have, but how we will have what we have to make it workable for the city to move it forward and change the perception that Riviera Beach is just a dumping stage, and everyone comes here that thinks that no one knows how to conduct business. So Ms. Bram thanked this board, and Mr. Brown also voiced his concerns as well. You all have heard from him also. So thank you as a board. Thank you.
That concludes our public comments. Mr. Gagnon, do we have any correspondence?
No additional correspondence.
Thank you. Members of the board having general comments related to anything related to the city? Any members? No member comments? Ms. Shepherd, you're recognized.
Yes, can I just clear up one thing going back to voting for the chairperson? I'm glad that we decided to hold off until Ms. James get here and give this board an opportunity to catch up where we are at, and then have the vice chair move into that position that next year, I think. I thought, Mr. Canuti, it would be not really knowing how it was going, that you kind of shift. I think you and Mr. Williams are the oldest one on the board. So that's how I was thinking without Mrs. James not being here. But saying that, I'm glad that we're holding off to give her an opportunity to respond back to us, because I think this board needs to catch up to where we are, and I think she's doing a good job leading us on. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to comment?
Just a correction, longest tenured on the board, maybe not the oldest.
I said tenured, didn't I? Then I said, that's you now. I meant tenured.
Any other members wishing to comment on general items related to the board?
No comments.
Okay. I do just want to say this. I know we had a very thoughtful discussion today, and I appreciate everyone's input. And that is exactly what I see as being the purpose of the board. That way we have an opportunity to have a discussion about what works, within reason, without being too, top heavy to potentially have problems when it gets to the next level. But I think that is what makes the board great, because we can all have some input on it. So thanks so much, members, for the thoughtful and spirited discussion. So those are my comments. And Mr. Gagnon, we're back at you for Planning and Zoning Board updates and upcoming projects.
Yes, sir. Our next meeting is scheduled for May 11th. We're anticipating at least 2 items, both site plans. One is for a potential restaurant called, it's at the old Crab Pot site, which is located southeast of Marina Grand. It hasn't been finalized yet, but that's anticipated to come before you on May 11th. Additionally, there is an industrial development located in the Haverhill Business Parkway in the west part of our community. It's called Cateau Plumbing, and that's also anticipated to come before the board on May 11th.
Question. Mr. Gagnon, is the site plans and I guess the preliminary information up on the website regarding these 2 projects?
Yes, I believe both site plan submittals and the application packets are available on our website currently.
Okay. One other unrelated comment. I was looking at the land use map, and the Gardens Road area, I know a lot of that over there is unincorporated. And my question is why? And it's a rhetorical question, but what does it take for us to annex some of those things into our city? Because I'm wondering, just looking at this map, and I know we have those trailer parks both on the west side of 95, which are essentially in the city, but they're classified as unincorporated Palm Beach County. There are a few pockets, however, right around just north of the Pepsi Cola facility that's in an area that's on the land use map as white. Why are they in our city and not in our city? And pretty much what I mean, if we provide them with police services and fire services, that's my question. It's a rhetorical question, but I just would like to know why, they're physically within our boundaries, but their carve out makes them unincorporated. So, and do we actually get anything as far as providing first responder services that you know of for those unincorporated places?
To answer the first part of the question, over the years the city has actually annexed property into the municipal boundary moving west. So there are some enclaves that are located within the city's current jurisdiction that still are unincorporated Palm Beach County. So there's really 2 ways that those properties can come into the city. There's a voluntary annexation process, which is at the will of the property owner, and then there is more of a forced annexation process, which is something I haven't experienced firsthand, but I hear that it's much more serious legally and not really something that is attempted very often. So if there are any business entities that wish to voluntarily annex into the city, we have a procedure in place that can accommodate that. As far as additional funding that's provided by those parcels, I'd have to look into that a little bit further. I don't know if there's any mutual aid agreements that currently exist. I'm guessing that there are, but as far as direct funding, I'd have to look into that.
Okay. I was just curious because it was quite obvious on our land use map when you looked around that area wise, maybe 5 or 6 parcels considered unincorporated. And I'm sure Palm Beach County doesn't send a fire truck from wherever they're located to come into service, any calls for that specific business. So those are my comments. Any other member?
Actually, I can answer that. Yes, they do.
They do?
Any of the unincorporated areas off of Gardens Road, the sheriff's office actually responds. It doesn't really happen often, but the sheriff's office, we were compelled to respond and take those calls.
Now,
Riviera Beach sometimes come and assist and take them, but for the most part, we were dispatched there as unincorporated officers. Yeah.
So as far as, I guess, fire and ambulance service and paramedic service, how does that work? Is that the same?
They would still come from, we would request fire rescue, and they would still come from
Okay.
Palm Beach County.
Just curious. Okay. But I thank you, Palm Beach County. Thank you for your service. I like our tax base just a little bit better. So that's it for me, members. Any other members?
Just a question on what's coming up on the restaurant. That is that going to require a zoning change? Because that's zoned residential now.
I think it currently has a downtown general zone designation and a downtown mixed-use future land use. So I think the use is actually compatible with the existing
Is it? Okay.
zoning.
Because I thought we changed it to at that time.
Historically, I believe there was a zoning change that was in conjunction with Marina Grand, but during our most recent revisit to the CIA area and zoning amendments, it was updated.
Thank you.
One last thing, Mr. Gagnon, at your leisure, can you provide us all the link, and I'm specifically saying that to the new members, where they can actually view the site plans that's still in review by the staff?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
By email. So thank you. If there's no other comments, I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Move to adjourn. Thanks.